Okay, so something I wanted to talk about was what I notice are the active and passive forces of nature that seem to be within everybody's mind and the activity that they do. So, one school of thought that people always run around with is that if I put everything that I have within myself into every activity all the time, I'm always going to win constantly and nothing is ever going to beat me. Because if I give the best and all 100% and I never give up and I never give in and I always go and push and put everything that I have into every circumstance that I am, I'm always going to win. Well, no, that's not true because you have to evaluate what it is you're putting yourself into, right? So if you just go in abashedly without having any kind of constraints or idea about what you're doing, it's like running towards failure for some reason. I don't know why a lot of people do that. I've done it sometimes. Like you just sort of want something to happen and you just throw a whole bunch of passionate energy at something and it doesn't always seem to work out in your favor because you weren't taking the time to evaluate what the hell you were doing with your time, right? So another school of thought is that, well, I need to sit back, I need to reflect, I need to take in all the information that I can about a certain subject, and then I need to project that over different circumstances, and then I need to analyze and make everything meticulous as I can. Well, that's, helpful a lot of the time. Like you can't just not know anything about what you're doing and expect to be successful at it exactly, but if you overanalyze things and you just sort of like take your time to figure things out, you ain't gonna get anywhere. You're not gonna go anywhere because while you're spending most of your time trying to do research and trying to think and trying to analyze all of these things, what you're doing is you're letting lots of opportunities and lots of things go by. You're missing out on a lot of time and circumstance. So, one school of thought that I just talked about, which would be overemphasis of activity, the other is to just sort of be reflective and meditative and think about all of the currents and all of the analysis that you can take into. You merge those two together, and there you seem to have what victory is, right? So you're merging your intelligence with your emotions, with your passion, with an initiative, with a proactive sense that you can have and be as influencing and put as much drive as you can into every circumstance as you can. Merge those together and you probably have success, right? Possibly. I mean, how many people can actually do that? Like, how can you sit back and have as much passion for something while looking at all the subjects holistically, right? So I think the hardest thing to do being a human, right? Like you're a human, you need to come up with definitions and you need to have very well defined limitations and things need to have boundaries. Because if things don't have boundaries, everything seems to blend into itself, right? And then, where the hell are you, right? I mean, you name a thing and you know a thing. The first, opportunity that you ever have with anything is understanding what it is. If you don't understand a thing of what it is, then how can you differentiate about what activities that you need for certain circumstances without knowing what it is you're doing, right? So another school of thought is boundaries and definitions and terms. However, you're creating limitations for yourself, right? So how easy is it, and I know a lot of people can't stand it, how easy is it to be judgmental, right? So whenever we come up with boundaries or definitions or any of these kind of terms, we are making huge blanket umbrella oversweeping ideas about a whole cast of people. We're creating identities for them. We're making all these things and we're coming to conclusions about people, circumstances, based off of our own experience, which is like, I mean, like, what are you going to do? You have your own experience, so you have to use that as a way to be reflective and to see things for what they are, right? So you kind of have no choice but to start off from that point initially, right? So, sure, it is really, 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 really hard to look at everything holistically and look at everything as it happens, right? Without coming up with any kind of instant definition or conclusion, because things aren't always going to be from your experience. I mean, as I said before, your experience is going to lead you into a pretty good narrative of what to expect, right? Like, I mean, you have to be able to expect what's going to happen in order to understand what you're going to do, but everything's like unique. Like, everything is absolutely unique, you know, and is not always going to fit into like the small little box that you've created for yourself with your patterns and your definitions, because the world doesn't work like that. The world is very, 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 it's uniform, it's filled with patterns, it's filled with absolute life, but the thing about it is that it's always breaking free of those patterns. The world is always going to throw something at you that you're absolutely unprepared for constantly. Absolutely constantly. I mean, look at this shit right now. Who would have thought like this crazy virus in the year 2020 would make everything so boring and shitty and lame and all that stuff? Nobody likes it. It's not fun. I hate it. I want it to end. You know, so who would have thought about that? Who would have thought that in a matter of like, what, 6 months, that the whole world would be dealing with this? I mean, well, kind of not the whole world, it's just like the United States right now. But I mean, basically, who would have thought that a curveball like that would happen? That's nature. And people are no different. People are always going to surprise you. Whenever you have you're raising a kid, they're going to say things and do things that you're absolutely not prepared for. You're not prepared for it. I mean, even if you have like your second or your third kid, like maybe you'll be able to kind of expect it, just because the way that people grow and the circumstances you can expect from it. But I mean, they're always going to say and do things that you don't expect, because nothing in the world is actually going to fit within that box and paradigm that you made for yourself, you know? So stop trying to make things fit into your conclusions, because the world doesn't need your permission to be a world. It already is, right? Like, you can figure it out. You can figure out your place in the world. You can figure out how it is you came to be and why you have the type of mind and you say and you do the things that you do. You can do that. Yeah, I mean, you can spend all of your time trying to figure it out. It could be fun, right? Like, it could be like a great thing. It could be what you want to do for the next years, to figure out why you did a certain thing, you know. But I mean, ultimately, all of those things that you didn't realize that you did, they were being reactionary. Because I mean, most of the time, what we don't realize is that most action is actually reaction, you know? Like, I mean, you go up to a dog and you just smack it on the head. What is it? It'll bite you. Everything is that way. Everything is reactionary. Absolutely. Like, I mean, how certain am I of what I'm saying is not based off of something that I heard earlier and I'm just, like, regurgitating it? I mean, most people are pretty aware that that's the truth, you know? This is regurgitated information like all the time. And that is that boxed in boundary that we have to. Because, I mean, in order to be like a living person and to have structure and to have anything work off of you, well, have you work inside of the world that you live inside of, you need to have some kind of structure and you need to have some kind of stability. And that's what these definitions and terms give us. They give us a fontis point and they give us like a balancing act to be able to springboard off of that, you know? So if you didn't have that springboard, if you didn't have those definitions, if you didn't have those terms, if you didn't understand how the world worked, well, we wouldn't have any of this stuff, you know? But at the same time, everything is always trying to break free from that. You know, a lake is always trying to become rain again, right? Like, I mean, everything is always trying to evaporate. Everything is always trying to find its own freedom. So there are these two aspects of nature that I started off talking about, absolute passion that does not want to be defined, does not want to be bound to anything, constantly wants to have over exuberating strength and force, and that's because it's pure life. And then you have something that is reflective and passive and filled with boundaries and filled with definitions and filled with this space that initial force created, right? So that is the holistic idea, and you merge the two, and then you seem to have like an intelligible reality that we seem to be living inside of, right? So everything has two dogs fighting inside of it all the time, constantly. And the hardest thing to do is to find that middle balance. So how do you find that middle balance? Like, how do you live a life that is not over analytical to where you just let everything fall by the wayside? And how do you live a life that isn't just filled with complete passion to where you're not burning yourself alive and burning all your relationships and burning through your money and burning through everything? I think that's the hardest thing that few people have figured out how to do, is to have a structured life, a meaningful life, an enjoyable life, but still filled with passion, right? Because, I think one thing that everybody hopes for is that when you get old enough, you make enough money, your life is just going to gel into this fit form that's just going to make everything super easy and is going to make everything absolutely fine. But that never happens. It never happens. And thank God it happens, you know what I mean? Because if anything ever just became this like kind of crescent solid form, you feel dead inside, honestly. Like, how many people live their life just living a routine? They just hate the routine. They hate everything. Nothing new seems to happen all the time. Well, that's because you wanted security. And once again, we talk about security versus freedom, So I think being able to live your life with passion, but also being able to have some sort of structure and some sort of like authority are actually not exactly mutually exclusive. Because as I just talked about, like if you live a completely structured life, it can wear you down. Like it can, really make everything seem horrible and terrible, and like life seems to be over for you. But the truth is that if you find some sort of structure, that's going to give you the ability and the foundation to have like true freedom, right? Like people, you go to the bank and it says money is freedom. Well, it's like kind of true. Because what is money other than accessibility to whatever you want to do? Because everything is made off of like a recapitulating finance system or a value system, right? So you've created a term, you've understood like how things are structured, and then if you still have like a little bit of passion and a little bit of life inside of you, you can use those and manipulate those things to get what you want out of your life, right? So you look at an engine block, right? So there's nothing about an engine block that isn't using the laws of thermodynamics. It's using physical laws. It's using all kinds of like scientific laws that are like absolutely fixed, and they may be disproven at some point, but they work, right? But you use those laws and you can go fly to the goddamn moon, bitch. There's nothing that is going to like limit you other than yourself, So while having boundaries and marrying your creativity is something that is going to create human progress. You know what I mean? And that's the hardest thing to do. That is the absolute hardest thing to do, is to always have passion inside of a structured life. Because on one hand, as I friggin' said earlier, too much passion, you're going to burn through everything. Too much structure, you're going to feel dead inside, and any opportunities are just going to pass by you, and you're not going to be able to see anything, and you're not going to be able to express anything, absolutely. You're going to make all these judgment calls about people and circumstances, and then you're just going to be basing everything off of your lame experiences, which are like limited anyways because you're choosing to limit yourself, right? So marry the two. Marry your creative life. Marry your ability to have structure and understanding and wisdom, right? So there's a quote from an author who I love named Eliphas Levi, and the quote is, imagination combined with reason is genius. And that is so absolutely true, right? Because imagination is like limitless. I mean, absolutely, like limitless. I mean, how many times were we as children daydreaming about infinite possibilities, and then we sleep and then we have even more infinite possibilities, right? Even as adults, you still dream so many things you don't even remember them. Or you come up with, creative things that were products of your imagination. Marrying that to reason, which is, I guess, more or less like logic, what works for you, what you see works in the world, what is fixed, creates genius, And what is genius? Genius is a work of art. Genius is something that a caveman painted 14,000 years ago, communicating whatever emotionality he felt to you, and you feel it. I mean, you don't live this dude's life. I mean, you don't understand his culture. You would be scared as hell if you met this guy, but you know what? Dude had genius. Dude was a creative artist, and he painted something that outlasted him way longer, and it is beyond language. It's beyond anything that we understand as like current culture, because it is human. He created something that was very human and is going to outlast him because he created it in stone. He painted it on stone. He took something that is within himself and he threw it in a very powerful way that cast it through tens of thousands of years into the future, goes past any kind of like realization or reasoning that you have in your mind, and goes way deep into the depths of who you believe that you are, right? So that's genius. And if a caveman can do that, I mean, a modern man should be able to do that, right? Like a modern man should be able to find his genius, and I think that's the hardest thing. That's why it's called genius, because it is not completely accessible, but it is accessible. It's absolutely accessible, and I think if you just believe in yourself, you never lose your imagination. You always question everything. You always try to find what the best things are that work for you, because there's no the best thing for anybody to do. That it doesn't exist. There's no like the absolute best thing to do, because it's based off of like who you are, and it's based off of the circumstances from where you come from, like what you've learned, like who you are as an individual, and that is always changing, and who you are as an individual is like always your choice. You know what I mean? So having those two aspects, having a huge amount of creativity and passion, having reasoning and understanding, is going to create genius and stability, and be able to let you, or be a tool for you to create whatever you want in the world. And look at everything around me. This bookcase, these books, all of that started, this Xbox, all of that started in someone's imagination, found its way into physical reality, had to fit into some sort of like reasoning scheme from the world, how it formed, and then it became an object. And then it became something perceivable for you. It is communicable from an intangible place into a physical manifestation. You know what I mean? So, and you're capable of doing that all the time, constantly. What is language? Language, you speak with your thoughts. You create with your words. Absolutely. Your thoughts have an impact on physical reality through your body, through your words, through your thoughts, through your actions, coming from your emotions, coming from a deep space inside of yourself. And never lose that. Never absolutely lose that, because that is childhood. That's what we learned in childhood. So don't ever lose your inner child. Don't ever lose the idea that everything can't be new. But also realize that you're living inside of a very structured world and you need to live in harmony with everything. Because anything that does not live in harmony is racing towards its own death. That's absolutely true. Racing towards your own death is not good. Like, number one, it's not good. It's coming from a huge force of life that just needs to happen and doesn't want to be bounded in any way, but it does, because it's been inside of, like, it's landed inside of like this monkey body. There's this monkey body that wants to experience things right now. He wants to make a video right now, So while you need to be limited to have experience, having those limitations merged with creativity creates infinite possibilities. So just think about that, right? So there's a dichotomy to everything, there's a duality to everything, and there's a middle contrast and balancing force to everything. So always just remember that, so you're never going to be able to be completely filled with boundless imagination that ruins everything and doesn't let you grasp anything, and it lets everything become sand in your hand. Never allows you to find anything new or peaceful or changing anything ever in your life, because everything seems to be structured and it's already concrescent and everything seems to be dead already. Those two are possibilities and they're wide spectrum, but live in the middle. I think that's what all these teachings are for. You live in the middle and you will find that there is infinite possibility, and you will never stop growing, and the world will always seem new and boundless and full of peace and full of love. So that's what I want to communicate to everybody, is just have peace and have love and just be a great person, So whatever you do with your day, have a good one. Have a good night. Have a good morning. Be with somebody that you like. And if you don't have any people that you like, go find some, because there's plenty of people. You're not stuck or married to anything exactly at any time. It's always your choice. Every life circumstance is your choice. All your emotions are your choices. So just realize that. And don't ever get caught up in too many circumstances in your life, because they're changeable. They'll end. Just like they started, they're going to end. So just don't forget about that. So, much love and peace and blessings.